Welcome to this introduction to the 2022 Imagine Belfast Festival of Politics and Ideas. I'm Alan Meban, and with me is someone who better than the festival director Peter ONeill, who has the energy behind 8 years of the festival and will be able to answer the many questions we might have. And I'm also joined by another Peter. We're collecting Peters this morning. Peter McCaughey from the International Peripatetic Sculptors Society, and I'll get better at saying that as we go on, but more from Peter number 2 in a minute. But Peter ONeill, how are you feeling this morning, beginning of the festival?
It's great, we're finally here, it's across the line, and particularly after the last 2 years where we were totally online, it's fantastic to welcome back, our in-person audiences and to see people in the flesh and see how they've changed over the last 2 years. So yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity now for us to showcase our work and to get this festival on the road.
And as we sit here in the studio, the 50 representatives from the 50 organisations who are producing more than 100 events at the festival, they're all coming into the big stadium, I think, and the crowds are cheering. I think there's fireworks kind of going on.
What a lovely picture.
But unfortunately, the funders didn't quite go to that level of funding.
Not really, but they're there in spirit.
They're in spirit. As a festival, you've got us up on a Monday morning. Not many festivals actually run events on Monday morning. So this is a sign that this is not your run-of-the-mill festival. This is not an arts festival. This is not a music festival. This is, give us a feel for why it's different.
Well, this is now our 8th year, and we first started this festival really on a whim, looking across to Scotland, where Peter's from, and the incredible amount of activity that was generated over the Scottish referendum at the time, and the run-up to the UK general election. And we thought, looking at Northern Ireland, my goodness, we're so flat here. People are bored with, formal party politics. There's really no grassroots sort of engagement, or very little. So we thought, well, let's try and do something about that and pilot, if you like, a festival which would involve, people who want, to discuss burning issues, particularly those that aren't really properly, developed in the proper media, if you like. They're a bit aren't that well publicized. So yeah, 8 years ago, we ran with about 40 events and got a fantastic sort of groundswell of reaction, and really the festival has grown from that, where we now have over 185 events, 50 plus partners. And I think audiences just like the idea that we're a little bit sort of quirky, a little bit sort of, fringy, and we invite the public, we invite organizations to run their own events as part of the festival, and people really love that platform, that sort of chance, to showcase their work and their ideas. So yeah, so far it's worked.
And it means that kind of niche ideas that are, as you say, less well developed in the media, but people can actually, you can try and you may only get a small number of people into a room, but boys, will those people be actually energized and become your advocates and actually start to understand it? So you can kind of grow, smaller organizations can grow their fan base nearly, and the number of people lobbying for them.
Absolutely, and there have been some examples of that. We had an event, a guy who went to one of our training events. We run a training program for event organizers as well, the Artivist Academy. But one of the guys who went to that, he suffers from vitamin B12 deficiency. So he thought, would there be any interest if I run an event on this? And hey-ho, we have a free room in Queen's. We had to move the room 3 times to cater for the increased number of registrations we got. All sorts of medical experts, patient groups, all sorts of people joined, what was, this physical event, and they were able to set up a support group, from that event, and to look at, test, all sorts of other projects fed from that, led by Queen's University, the medical team. So that was a nice example of where just one person's idea actually got translated into a real sort of project and still has legs.
I'll come back to some of the things that maybe are happening this year and what this year's festival's about. But my other Peter McCaughey, tell us a little bit about the International Peripatetic Sculptors Society. Peripatetic is one of those words that I remember from school, because the music teachers who went around between different schools, peripatetic meant they only spent a day in a school and then they had to move to the next one and the next one. So you're kind of You're artists who are constantly on the move, is that it?
To an extent, yeah. I should just say that when I say the term International Peripatetic Sculptors Society. It operates kind of a little bit like a white witch's curse. So anybody watching is now confirmed and is now appointed as an international peripatetic sculptor. It's a rather kind of aggrandized term. We're just wandering about and doing stuff. And really, that is our area, one of our areas of expertise, that we like to wander about and do things really quite spontaneously, without necessarily bringing any tools or objects with us. That we go out in cities and into the countryside and just make things with the material that we find.
So give us some examples of things you've done previously, and we'll come back to what you might do in Imagine Belfast in a minute, but what have you done previously? What are some of the kind of artistic flaneur kind of things that you've got up to?
Well, as peripatetic sculptors, we'd all sorts of things, you know, that come to mind. There's a great moment. I remember we were walking down the Clyde in Glasgow, and I should say I'm a son of Omagh. Peter might say I'm from Scotland, but I am a son of Omagh, born and bred. But
with a Scottish accent.
But we're walking down to the Clyde, and somebody remembered in the group we were with that underneath the pedestrian crossing unit that you get, there's a little rotator that rotates, and it's there to help specifically, I think, if you're hard of hearing and hard of seeing, it's there to help guide you across the road. And so we had this moment of realizing, here's a wee kinetic engine that's in operation every time it's time to cross the road. Can you attach something to it to drive? Can you build a small machine? And spontaneously we turned it into a little plant turner by plucking a weed from the ground and getting a discarded paper clip. And there you have this wonderful wee moment, and you wait for it to beep, and then it just rotates for a wee moment. And it's typical of that tiny wee epiphany that you get in everyday life when you feel as a citizen that you can kind of engage with things. And I suppose for us, it's a very playful, dandy-esque kind of way of addressing the world. But it's also got a wee bit of politics there as well, and encouraging us to be kind of active citizens, to feel that we can make a mark or intervene in our own lives. And you know, in some of the other works that have happened, you know, people realize how you've got 20 people in a group, you can close a street, or kind of, you know, intervene in other more dramatic ways into the world around you. So
it'll go down well in Belfast if you can close streets with 20 people. I think we know all we could teach you to do with Peter. Barely needs more than two. So anyway, your group is your artist in residence at the festival. Peter, what was going through your mind when you booked this crowd?
Well, we had a good look at them beforehand, to be fair. You know, Peter was involved in the festival. Was it 2 years ago? 3 years ago?
Yes.
And it was a very excellent production in the Crescent Arts Centre, which people still talk about. So yeah, I've been a fan of his work and, you know, his colleagues' work for a long time. And again, part of the festival is to inject new ideas, new sort of cross currents, and to work with our existing participants, you know, people who come into the festival and perform or speak for us. So Peter's work touches on a lot of those themes, and he's able to facilitate and bring a lot to the festival, not just in terms of these very interesting, if you like, walking tours or walking events, but a wider focus where he can help liaise and work with our audiences and participants to create a bit of a festival community, and to draw out some of the themes that no doubt will develop during, you know, this small window during this festival program.
Because typically, although the festival has the theme this year of Road Test Your Reality, but the themes will emerge from actually just, if you go to 3 or 4 events, you'll realise that there are other emerging ideas and things that will come out of it, and also, I guess, what happens in our own politics and our own news of the week. You came across on a ferry, and we know exactly which ferry you didn't come across on, because it's well in the news.
Yeah.
So you're already kind of experiencing disruption within before the festival even starts.
Well, absolutely, and as I think I mentioned to you, we flew the Jolly Roger on that ferry, daubed with the name of said ferry company that I could no longer travel with, as just a wee act of kind of just to note, to be able to actually say something about something we're all raging about, and to be able to respond to that instantaneously, and it was good to do that. But the thing that Peter was saying about we do wander about in the cities that we go to and in the places that we go to, but the conversation with Peter was also about kind of wondering about the content of the festival. Myself and Roddy Buchanan, who's with me today, and Ben Parry, who'll be contributing, we're really curious to think about being connectors to the content in the festival. And I think, like you were intimating, everybody's so busy in the festival delivering their own thing. Sometimes we lose the opportunity to make those, consolidate networks where we might increase our agency and catalyze, each other if we just had time, to do that. So we're kind of offering to try and do a bit of that, to pay a bit of attention to, and we're certainly making ourselves available to try and, help those connections grow. And particularly, for the publics and audiences that turn up as well, seeing everybody, not just as you give the example earlier, Peter, not just a participant, but as a potential contributor to things going forward.
And just to note that 5 o'clock each early evening during the festival period, from Monday to Sunday, at 5 o'clock, people are invited to come to the Crescent Arts Centre Cafe, the pantry, where Peter and colleagues and others from our team, will talk about what's happened during the day, the events that they've been to, and ways that we can, as a festival community, further develop. And particularly with audience members who are very invited to come along, to share a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, and just to reflect really on the day's proceedings.
A kind of a debrief and figure out a strategy for what is it that we could do in the back of what we've heard.
And a sort of supercharging, because what I think, somebody in the room turns up, audience member, another kind of contributor to the festival, turn up with an idea, and, I'm always very optimistic of, where ideas come from and where really good ideas. And the grassroots approach to this festival is right up my tree, in the sense of kind of just trusting that those ideas are just latent out there in the community. So we're kind of positioning ourselves as superchargers who will listen well, connect those ideas to other ideas, and then think about, as imaginatively as possible, what could be a delivery system for that kind of idea.
Structured throughout the week, though, you also have, is it Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday?
Yeah.
At 10 o'clock, people can book on imaginebelfast.com and to take part in one of your walks.
Yes.
And for up to 3 hours, you will meander somewhere and
make work as we go.
And you will be playful in the environment as you go.
Yeah.
So if you want to become part of the intrepid International Peripatetic Sculptor Society, get on the website, book. The name will get longer as we go on this morning. Peter, what Road Test Your Reality, tell us just a little bit about that as the strapline, in terms of, I guess it's kind of easy what it means, but just rehearse that for us, and then...
Yeah, lots of festivals will pick a very sort of narrow or, very, specific theme, but because our festival is a public submission process, at the heart of it, we don't try not to curate too much. It's people that really set, the ideas in motion, submit events and whatever. An idea that came strong from that sort of process was this idea of like a testing ground, where people can actually look at ideas from a non-partisan or, from a varied sort of viewpoint, and, actually just start the idea of piloting or testing or, being able to explore these very difficult conversations without being, very dogmatic or, definitive. As I get older, there's less black and whites in my life. Everything becomes, much more nuanced. And goodness knows the issues that we're currently facing and experiencing, not just locally but globally, require that sort of fresh thinking. That we, explore new ways of addressing some very age-old, problems, but that we need to be much more adventurous and much more creative in terms of seeking out new solutions. So that's really where that's...
Yeah. As a festival, you kind of like to challenge. You like to challenge people. You don't like them to be complacent. You like them to be kind of presented with things that might even be beyond their comfort zone, but to kind of say, here's a different perspective on this that you've overlooked. Does that change what you feel? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but that's part of the role of the festival, to wake people up to the fact.
Absolutely. And then we have some events that perhaps typify that more than others. Like we have this event, the Belfast Battle of Ideas, which is on Saturday, curated by the Academy of Ideas, which will be quite a provocative series of panel discussions looking at some quite difficult issues. But again, our speakers address these themes from different viewpoints. And there is that real onus or that real sort of invitation, to the audience to participate. That it's not just listening to people, on a panel.
And it's not just looking for consensus. It's
Yes, it is active, real debate, and I think sometimes we've lost that. I'm old enough to remember, the women's movement, trade union movements, lots of community events, lots of public meetings. Now we've sort of become more keyboard warriors, and these sort of debates are now carried out in the ether. So it'd be good, I think, to us to go back, particularly now, post-COVID, post-pandemic to a degree, to actually get down in a room and listen to people's viewpoints carefully and sensitively, but also robustly respond and take part in these big debates on the big issues of our times.
And probably about 3/4 of the festival is real life events, and about 1/4 of it's online, roughly.
Yeah, surprisingly, not that many online event suggestions came in from the public, which reflects, I think, just a real desire to get back into physical events. So yes, about 1/4 are online. And again, we have some really big hitters like Michael Ignatieff. Realistically, Michael, can't really come to Belfast. But because we have him online, there will be hundreds of people across the world, listening to him talk about, again, the huge big issues, Ukraine, his experience of war, how the global political, if you like, institutions are, in flux. So that would be an interesting online event. But yeah, there's no that we have really big physical events. And even tonight, we have an event looking at a book launch of UDR Declassified with the Pat Finucane Centre in St. Mary's College. We'll have over 100 people at that event. We've sold out today, for example, with Paddy Cullivan, his sort of cabaret show, looking at the life and times of Michael Collins, again, sold out. So yeah, it's great to see people want to come back to our venues and to take part in our festival. And
you have theatre this year. Amanda's due play This Shit Happens All the Time at the Lyric. That's on from, I think, probably tonight or tomorrow night. That starts. So a very personal piece, very powerful. She would normally be. So you've kind of got everything from wandering minstrels doing art as they go, to theatre, to book authors, to just groups on the ground doing things.
Well, we do find that sometimes the arts are a much better way of expressing, difficult and contentious, political issues. The culture has a much more, if you like, nuanced and imaginative way of looking at deep-seated, problems, issues. So yeah, we have a huge arts program, and we have film as well, fantastic series. So Strand coming up with Queen's Film Theatre, which again looks at the history of film censorship in Northern Ireland, and we will actually screen some of these iconic movies that were passed.
So I think Ourselves Alone is probably tonight.
That's right,
and
tonight.
Tommy, Last Temptation of Christ, Hidden Figures, which wasn't banned, but was a set of people who were not ever portrayed as part of the narrative.
So an interesting selection, and we've got Shan Barber, who's a very well-known academic, at Queen's, who has written extensively about that. So she has recorded some intros for each of these films, so that will provide interesting context of where censorship has featured, in terms of our film history.
It's a bit early to be talking about the last day of the festival yet, but it would only give you hope that the next 6 days of hard work are over. But you're closing with Verboten and Verbant from Spark Opera, which is basically looking at, I guess, opera. It's music from the Third Reich band. This this has become more pertinent in the last couple of weeks than probably intended. But so they'll be playing a whole series of kind of pieces and singing a whole series of pieces that would have been banned by a kind of Nazi organisation that didn't necessarily like all music or felt that it was. So that kind of cancel culture thing. You're bringing the past to the present as well.
Yes, and again, it has echoes of what we see now in Ukraine, and a superpower invading, a neighbour. All the proceeds of that event will go to the Red Cross Ukrainian appeal. And there's that during our festival, I think we will pick up, these synergies, these cross references to Ukraine, to other, issues that are percolating, the strike actions across Belfast at the moment, for example. I'm sure that will feed into, some of our event discussions as well. So basically, it's a smorgasbord of, ideas and themes. And really, the invitation is out to people, to people watching, but people who have registered for other events. Come along and take part in the discussions and debates. Don't feel shy. All of our speakers and performers want to engage, with audiences. And, we hope that we can really create, something vital that has legs and that can percolate, for the next couple of months, particularly as we approach the assembly elections.
Mm-hmm. You've probably had a look through the programme, which is enormous. And are there things in it that you're keen to get to amongst the other commitments that you have in the festival?
Well, we've actually we've put a timetable up on the wall. We're going to do an exhibition in the Crescent, and we're going to kind of flag up all our activity. We really are, the three of us, Ben, Roddy, and myself, are dedicated to being present during the whole thing. And we've picked out a whole number of items within the festival, which one of the three of us will try and attend. So we can do that thing we were speaking about earlier.
You can sample and kind of start to feel the...
Yeah, making those connections. And I think we see ourselves in that regard, in the work out in the city, but also in that regard as kind of mappers of territory. And I think that attempt to sort of hold complexity in mind and to make visual maps. I referenced Peter, and would reference anybody paying attention to this, to the work of Mark Lombardi, one of my favourite artists, who made these extraordinary kind of critical maps of, for example, the Iran-Contra affair. And I think it's incredible when you map stuff, you can hold complexity, you can hold the detail all in one piece of paper. And somehow it allows the arguments and the different positions all to be present, but the kind of weightings to be calculated as well, in the way that you can read the London Tube map in a second and get the fact that it's complex, but you know how to get from A to B as well in it. So we want to work quite hard with the content in the festival, and of course we've picked some things, but we're also looking for the surprises of those things that you're not interested in, or you don't think you're interested in.
Oh, this is a festival for surprises. I mean, it's the weakest looking event turns out to be the one that you go away with and think about for ages. There is a question from somebody who's watching. We have an audience. It's very good. And Ian asks about, this is a dangerous one because we have to think on our feet here, but what's the best new idea or interest that, Pete, you've got, or any of the rest of us, from the festival, and that might have changed your mind or made you think about something, if I extend it, made you think about something that hasn't necessarily you thought about before? For me, I think it's probably the basic income stuff, because I was aware of basic income. And this could be, I could be slightly counter-cultural in this, because it put me off the idea, because actually having gone to events for 2 years in a row with a set of enthusiasts for it, suddenly the complexity of achieving it, it kind of started to work on me to go, this is such a good idea, but you kind of have to stop the world, and then a bit like P&O Ferries, restart in about 3 weeks' time with a whole new way of doing it, which probably wouldn't work either. P&O Ferries, a very bad example. But it felt like it was going to be nearly too complex for a large kind of thing to work. Though it is interesting to see that there are trials, and I do follow those a lot more closely now. But it was...
I'd tell you what, I'd love to have a debate about that, and I loved the presentation last year, which was the one online that, one of the ones I attended, and I thought that basic income is probably the most exciting principle. But I know exactly your point about its complexity. But I think this is where the word imagine is really, really important, and we are brilliant at this on this wee island. We've been confabulous all our time. Freud said about the Irish that you can't psychoanalyze them because they live in a land of myth and rumour, and we are always making stuff up, the wind-up culture and all the rest.
We're mad, basically, is what I say.
But the idea of imagine it to be so, and I think that the only way you get to basic income, you can't calculate your way to it. The iterations are far too complex. You have to just start it, and you have to imagine it to be so. And so much of the rest of society is just like that, is really predicated on abstractions. But basic income is a brilliant model. It's a bit like where the dole office used to be over there, where we all used to be able to do things and sign on, And I think that idea that every citizen is entitled to a stipend. So every citizen could be an artist or a poet or a kind of, and begin to roll that out. I mean, I'm a mad advocate of it, and I think I acknowledge absolutely what you've said, and I think that would be a very good starting point. Let's do that in this festival. Let's have a debate between, you cannot make it work practically because it's far too bloody complex, and all those tests are siloed, so they're kind of useless. You can do even a test in the whole country, but it's the international markets that determine so much of our lives now. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right to say, it puts you off, and yet it's an absolutely important principle. We just have to imagine it into hypothetically position it into reality, and I think it will work.
Well, that's a great example, because like the Belfast Basic Income Group was established really from one of our events. I think it was about 6 years ago. And at the time, people thought, "Oh, what a mad idea," But of course, now we see the Irish government down south, actively has got a pilot, a support scheme, for artists. But Ian, thank you for your question. And from my perspective, I think in recent years has been the growth of an exploration of those underused or neglected public spaces, such as alleyways. So one of our long-standing partners, Liminally, Maeve McAloran, and partners 9 Foot in Common. We've been running these really exciting community projects where we're repurposing, if you like, alleyways, turning them into outdoor exhibitions, having bits of performance spaces, working with local communities about taking control, of these spaces. And I think that's been a really exciting development, and it's fantastic to see so many agencies, but also members of the public now, wanting to find out more about, alleyway projects like this, how entries, can be spruced up and turned into community spaces. And of course, with COVID, these spaces became even more important. So we're really looking forward, to those projects that will be operating next weekend in 3 locations across the city. We've all sorts of interested and quirky creatives coming in to develop public performances and artwork in these spaces. So definitely look out, for those projects, which we think will be particularly interesting and exciting.
It's a festival of ideas and politics. The politics, but people might be surprised that there are very few politicians in the programme. There are very few references to parties in the programme. That's a deliberate thing, really, that you do small p politics, and you want people to talk about the issues rather than to be talked to by politicians. Is that it?
Well, yes. And again, I suppose with there's so many festivals in this city, so you want to be a bit distinctive and different. And let's face it, the politicians dominate the airwaves, really, for 51 weeks of the year. So when we were starting this, we thought, well, let's create a platform, for new voices, create space for people who usually don't, generate that much, coverage or publicity. It's also easier, to be frank, on a very pragmatic basis, not to have politicians involved, because, you have to create a balance. You have to bring, multiple parties together, on panels and the rest of it. And again, I don't want to be too critical about our politicians, but we don't necessarily hear an awful lot new. They don't really bring an awful lot to these types of discussions. They're ground down, and they're party machines. And
they're very welcome to attend and listen and hear perspectives on issues that they may have never thought about before.
Absolutely.
You could get a good manifesto out of some of the things here.
They can take a day off and come along and have some fun at some of our events. So, yeah, that's been the approach. It's not a slur on politicians or something. We'd love to see them at our events. But yes, the festival is really designed for new voices and for new ideas that don't normally get discussed in our political discourse.
I mean, just to say, I think about that, the example of the work that you give about the, disused space is a great example of something that is prototyped, grassroots, and then actually that is the type of thing that can be, because high streets all across the world are failing because of the different economic circuits that we've got now, and because of the pandemic and everything else, and nobody seems to be able to solve this. And I think that idea that a grassroots activity in a bespoke way locally begins to find solutions, but that there is an interest in those being distributed back to then the politicians are told. Then it's kind of communicated back to them, and they then pay attention. And I think that is the right way around for that relationship. And that's in Scotland and in Glasgow in particular. That's been really rolling, and there's a couple of really good models that are working, like the stall space model, where there are now mechanisms, very simple civic documents for 1-page insurance handovers for the use of significant buildings and kind of public spaces. And a lot of people are coming back into those spaces. But these are the examples of, the politicians are not solving these problems. And I think your process is going to generate lots of potential ideas to prototype, and most will fail, because actually the type of thing that you're saying about UBI is the same with these ideas. Lots of ideas fail, lots of prototypes fail to get one that sticks. But the idea that you're doing it is the brilliant way to go forward. And there's a kind of fearless idea that within the festival, I think, is so exciting.
It's definitely an opportunity. There's no other festival that would be as close to the ground and actually just trying things, or giving people the space to say, talk about what you've tried.
Well, thank you. I say we don't take ourselves that seriously, maybe. Like we don't have any staff, we don't have offices.
We're looking at the entire festival office, basically. It's out of office today because it's sitting here.
Well, it just means that we can sort of experiment and whatever, the world's not going to end if we stop running, And the good thing we've done in the past, though, unfortunately not for this year, is that we generate these sort of projects. Like last year we had a thing where we invited people to send us 3 suggestions on how to build Belfast back better, which generated, there was something like 300 suggestions.
Some of which did appear to be maybe taken up by a local city council who were looking at their list and able to...
Really?
I think that 1 or 2 are pretty close to being real things.
Well, we fed them into these sort of wider consultation processes and asked people again to debate. So yes, In the past, we've run alternative manifesto schemes as well, where we've asked the public to suggest, what would, if you were in charge, what would you do? Again, that generated some very interesting stuff, which we did actually forward to the political parties, for consideration in their manifestos. So yeah, we have these sort of side projects. We've even run our own election campaign.
Wow.
The same old sort of campaign.
Posters went up on lampposts around the area.
I think I remember that one.
A vote for me is a vote for me. Whatever happens, just keep voting for me, said the very nice, suave, sophisticated figure with a different coloured rosette in each one. Vote for me or someone else just like me. Standing up for me, you can count on it. I wrote these down last night. Don't think, just vote. And scared of them ones, vote for us'ns. Which, now, you did get some criticism for being very cynical, Peter.
I know,
we've
got a bit more optimistic since.
But in a sense, it was a provocation, I guess, and it was very imaginary. Also, it took a long time for journalists actually linked the fact that they went up in the week of the festival to the festival. I think like 4 or 5 days.
Understandable, yeah, but they create a bit of a stir, all right. And again, we do quite like doing these sort of projects, as a bit of fun. We've done other street art projects that are, we've doctored the physical environment a bit. 1
or 2 of the street signs with that very famous artist are still have the little
indeed,
extra bits on them.
Most of them are still up, which is great. So again, we can afford to experiment a bit. But yeah, the festival is what it is. It's a very small, quirky, example. Like we don't have any great claims for what we achieve, but it does.
That's an engine, and I must say that I'm probably less cynical than you in that regard, Peter. And I'm really interested in the idea that a festival of ideas generates ideas that actually really have traction. But I think to take that forward, you have to. I kind of often describe my process a bit like love and critique. And I'll work with anybody. I mean, I really will. And I will because I think that in that opportunity to speak with a politician or speak with a local council, I go into it with a good heart and the hope that for all the kind of reasons for which I should be cynical, there's a little kind of tiny window of opportunity. You might reconnect the child in that person that remembered what it was like to have ideas and get things done. And I think that it's the halfway house of that is when a city like Belfast or Glasgow begins to see that Peter's festival or our festival is this incredible engine for tourism or successful. And so we begin to, as a halfway house, support it or appreciate it on the basis of an income generating thing. That, as I think we'd all agree, is the misdirection.
But it's an idea generating thing is really what it's about. It's about what people imagine. It's in the name.
But on the other hand, I think the artists are the worst in the world for sitting on the fences and critiquing at a distance and not really being interested. I'm very interested in how in the fine art tradition, artists just in the 20th century abstracting themselves from the responsibility to function. And I'm really actually interested in function. So I'm interested in the craziest ideas from the festival, but how it might actually function in our realities. And to function in our realities, we have to involve the councils, the politicians, the other civic workers, all the parties, and to find ways that things are just not party political anymore, that there are issues that are too important to be sort of dictated by party politics. And I think, but we do need people on board. And I think, as I think your sequence is the right way around, generate the momentum, generate the ideas, grassroots, and then give those brilliant list of ideas forward for people. And they're so good, they're undeniable to take forward.
We've probably, our last question here will come from David, who's not a million miles away from where we're sitting, but in a whole different bit of the building. He's watching and says, and I guess, well, actually, you can join in with this as well, but if you had an ideal event, this is dangerous, but if you had an ideal event, what speakers or what kind of event would you have? Kind of your dream dinner party for Imagine Festival? I guess most of your dream things are in the festival because you just ring people and ask them to come.
Yeah, though I try not to do that much. I think the danger is, you become the super curator, the sort of ego takes over and you think, you know what audiences want. And my goodness, the longer I'm in this game, the less I know, it really is, events that you think should fly out, don't, while, the really quirky ones do. So, David, to answer your question, well, first of all, you should be on, the dinner table. Come along, we want our audience members, involved.
Participate in the open call for next year's festival to put your ideas in. Yeah.
And historically, of course, you could talk about Mandela and all sorts of, but, you've got to be realistic. Who is available now? Can they come to Belfast? Are they interested in your proposition? Like Noam Chomsky last year was a real coup for us, to be fair, and I still have email discussions with him. He's a real personal hero of mine. So that was really being a bit vain, dragging him into it. People like Michael Ignatieff as well, people who've been on our lists for a long time. Helen Thompson, who you're going to be interviewing soon, she is a really smart, commentator. So yeah, fantastic,
That's coming up at 5 o'clock today, Monday.
Yeah,
about her new book, Disorder,
which
is remarkable given it was written well before Ukraine became a conflict zone, but looking at, I guess, the geopolitics and the economy,
and energy,
oil basically, and then the democratic changes and how that weaves together into the kind of pickle that the world's in. And it's quite. I'm looking forward to talking to her at 5.
So yeah, there's lots of people out there, David, would like to involve on a practical level. Can we get them, on our screens and in our venues? And that's why people like you and others, suggesting ideas, suggesting speakers, that makes all the difference, really, rather than someone like me trying to dream up what we think, is going to be an ideal.
But for every bit of the festival that has a speaker and a kind of very curated thing, it also then has completely anarchic kind of groups who say that there was an issue we want to come and talk about, and much less structured, much more getting people into the vibe of a new area.
Yes, I suppose we do have that balance. And again, our university partners, bring really exciting speakers, to our table as well.
But, if I made a pitch on that, one of the reasons I love the word imagine is because I think quite a lot of the debate that we have had traditionally in this country has been predicated not upon imagining futures, but upon talking about the past, and kind of often very bitterly, and kind of, our whole debating culture about trying to enshrine and protect what has been or what is currently, but not about actively using that role of imagining. And I love that, I think it's a tool that's used in psychology, but I only heard it as a wee anecdote about the record producer and the musician were brought together by a mutual friend. They hated each other, but they were brought together in an act of reconciliation. And the mutual friend said, "Okay, record producer, you're the musician, and musician, you're the record producer. Now discuss that second album." And all of a sudden they're asked to imagine from the other person's position and having a conversation which they could act. But that ability to imagine ourselves out of trouble and out of our pasts and into new futures. And so for me, the answer to your question is I'd walk out of here and I'd meet the first 6 people that I meet in Shaftesbury Square, and I'd get them in, and I'd absolutely trust that they would be brilliant if supported in the right way to have a conversation together and to imagine our collective futures on a set of themes that weren't based upon arguments about the past, but what could we, if we could get them imagining, whatever it was they wanted to imagine, I think I would just trust that would be my favourite event. And we do that from time to time, actually. I guess, you know, we do run things like that, and I have to say, it's the proof of the pudding. It always works.
People will be avoiding Shaftesbury Square
Yeah.
for the next 7 days.
If you find yourself passing the Present Art Centre Cafe at 5 o'clock any night, 6 of you could get dragged off the street in. I think he's going to offer you a free cup of coffee if you're one of those 6 people, but you may have to talk quite a lot for your trouble. So Peter McCaughey of the intrepid, imaginative International Peripatetic Sculptors Society. That name will be with me all week. Best wishes for whatever happens out of this week. Say Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10 to 1, you can book onto one of their walking tours, or you can just turn up at the Crescent Art Centre or the cafe at 5 o'clock any night and have a chat about the thing. Peter ONeill, may you look as well rested on Sunday night when the end of the festival, so 21st to 27th of March. But hope things go really well. Amazing after 8 years that we don't have the continuity Imagine Festival or the Democratic
Bring it on,
Imagine Festival.
More the merrier.
You know, we have no splits. The festival just carries on as a single boat, but it gets bigger every year. Hopefully you will join us for more and more events. Lots of stuff still for sale, most of it free on imaginebelfast.com. And welcome to the festival, and I hope you have a great week road testing your reality. So from Peter and Alan, who should be Peter, thank you very much, and all the best. Have a great festival.
Thank you.